Tonight, we put a spotlight on the state of the Ghanaian worker with barely 5 days to May Day. Now, we know that Ghana's labor front has been quite turbulent this year. Labor unions have been up in arms against government with the industrial action of the civil and local government staff for the payment of predominantly the neutrality allowances entering the 6th day, and others threatening to stop at nothing in their quest to get the employer to increase salary at inflationary rates. Now, mindful of the current state of the economy and the unemployment situation we find in the country, and with a couple of days to the day we celebrate workers, we will delve into the life of a Ghanaian worker and ask the question whether they are being paid living wages. We'll also be tackling the most important question to do with whether they are delivering value for money. We'll be joined by parliamentarians and also social welfare committee members and employment committee members. We'll be joined by the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission and Economist on this particular show. But first, let's start with those who've been working and been breaking their back for everybody in this country. After this break, the Health Service Workers Union will be joining me first for a broader conversation on the state of the Ghanaian worker. You're welcome back. This is UPfront. My name is Raymond Donkor. So I've been trying to tell you that today's conversation is dedicated to workers across the country. With a couple of days to the day we celebrate workers, we'll be finding out the state of the Ghanaian worker. But more importantly, we'll be drilling down to the recent happenings on the state of Ghanaian, labor front. First, joining us from the Health Service Workers Union is Franklin OWUSU, who is the General Secretary. Mr. OWUSU, you're welcome to UPfront. If you can hear me now, it goes without saying, but I need to ask you that question about if you can generalize not only for the Health Service Workers Union, but what do you think is the state of the Ghanaian worker today? Are you better off than you were, let's say, a year before? Is the lot of the Ghanaian worker improved in any way? Well, I guess we're having some slight challenges with you there. We should be able to fix this and get to appreciate what the workers are saying. My guest now joining me via Zoom is the General Secretary of the Health Service Workers Union, who is Franklin OWUSU. Mr. OWUSU, I given to understand that we are on a better line now. So the question I asked was related to basically what we are talking about. What's the state of the Ghanaian worker today?
Okay, thank you. The Ghanaian worker is not happy today because things are not too good for Ghanaians. The salaries of our working force is very low. It is not low because we are unable to negotiate better salaries, but it is low because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Unfortunately, last year was a bad year for labor because what we did negotiate was not good at all. We negotiated for 4% for last year and 7% for this year. Unfortunately, recent happenings in the economy, especially inflation, which nobody anticipated was going to go this high, has come to erode all the good things that the Ghanaian worker had. And for that matter, if you look at transportation alone, you can tell that the Ghanaian worker is not happy. So the state of the Ghanaian worker is that every worker, especially in the health sector, are not happy.
Now, what are the peculiar situations within the health sector that's making health sector workers particularly unhappy?
Well, I would say it is not only about the health worker, but it's all workers in general. I wouldn't say something is happening in the health sector that is making the health sector workers unhappy, but it's a general economic trend and all workers that we are talking about in the country.
Now, you first mentioned salaries, and it's been a thorny issue. There's a current negotiation ongoing. I don't know if it's already concluded, with the tripartite committee deciding what's going to happen in the future. Already, we've heard the TUC General Secretary say inflationary rate is the standard for your demand, and nothing short of that will be accepted. Mindful of our economic situation, where we find ourselves in the country currently, government complaining that there isn't enough money to even pay people and to do many other things in the country. Would it be fair, just, and would it be in tandem with the practice of good faith for you to consistently demand more at this time?
My brother, I know that the tripartite has started its negotiation, and what the tripartite seeks to do at this time is negotiating the minimum wage. It's not the base pay, but the minimum wage also sets the standard for negotiating on the base pay. But you can see clearly that workers have given so much to their employers. When we realized that COVID was there, we all agreed that we should go for something lower. But looking at the situation today, for how long can workers continue to give off? And for how long will the employer also continue to receive? I think we have gotten to the stage where we should be able to meet each other halfway. Demanding for anything at the base of inflation, it is just the base. Restore at least what I used to purchase the previous year. That doesn't mean we have demanded anything beyond that. But to make me better off, it should be something plus the base, which is the inflation. So if organized labor is demanding for a base of inflation, I don't think it is unfair. It is just to say, restore me to at least what I was able to buy the previous year.
Now, the understanding many get from this conversation is that on one hand, there are complaints about the productivity and the production from these sectors. The complaint is that workers do not give up their best, but are always demanding more. Are these claims legitimate?
Who is saying this? What did the person use to measure productivity? I want to believe the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission has not even set the rules for measuring productivity. So it is preempting. If somebody says workers are not working, we want somebody to measure the productivity of workers to say that this is the target I set for you. You have not been able to meet it. Or this is what you are supposed to do. You are not doing it. But if it's just a rhetoric thing, somebody is continually repeating, workers are not working. Workers are not working. If workers were not working, we're going to be where we are today. I don't want to believe so. For me, I think an empty sack cannot stand. If you want to get the best out of any worker, then give the worker something better than what he's seeing today. And definitely you will see something also better, or you receive something better from that employer, or sorry, the employee.
Now, currently, CLOSAC is on strike. There are indications that if the conversations do not go well, we should expect a lot more industrial action. Is this healthy for the current climate we find ourselves?
I don't want to delve into the issues of CLOSAC. CLOSAC is an entity on its own. It's a national union, just as Health Services Workers Union. If CLOSAC finds something legitimate and they are crying for it, Health Services Workers Union will not want to stand their way. If it is legitimate, let them go for it. When our time comes and something is legitimate, if the employer finds it good to pay that, when my time comes, I will expect that he does the same. Because I don't want a situation where an employer will say, for this person, I'll do it for, or for this other person, I'll discriminate against. That one, I don't think it will be fair on the part of any employer. But I don't want to believe HSWU or Health Services Workers Union will stand in the way of CLOSAC demanding what is legitimate to them.
I get your point. My question really was about the current strike and the fears that some of these industrial action do not bode well for our development as a country, especially when we are mindful of the climate we find ourselves currently.
Well, from my point of view, I can see that there is an agenda by government to divide the front of workers. If the government finds that doing bits and pieces of this kind of arrangement is okay for him as an employer, let it be. When we get to the bridge, all of us will cross it. But to say that somebody is gearing up because somebody else is having an industrial action, I don't want to believe so. If the person finds something good, or any other union for that matter finds it that it is time for them to negotiate, they should go ahead and demand whatever lawfully it is theirs.
You mentioned division on the front of labor. I mean, that's one issue that's been raised. That issue has already been raised by CLOGSAG. They believe that the TUC has not given them the right kind of support in this particular matters. From where you sit as Health Service Workers Union, is the current tussle between CLOGSAG and the TUC healthy?
I don't want to see that there's a tussle between CLOGSAG and TUC. And as I've already said, CLOGSAG is a national union just like Health Services Workers Union. TUC is an umbrella of 22 national unions. And so there's a clear distinction between CLOGSAG and TUC. If there is any tussle, then it should be a national union like Health Services Workers Union and CLOGSAG. Please, let's leave these issues and talk about the substantive issues of workers' demand. If for one or two reasons, somebody, an individual, feels that I don't like this person or I don't like this organization, let's not delve into those matters. For me, I don't want to see that there is...
I get your point, though. There's the part where CLOGSAG is already saying they're not going to be working with TUC on May 1st. That's May Day. Is Health Service Union workers going to work with TUC on May Day?
Is this the first time CLOGSAG is saying they won't work with TUC? Last year, they wrote similar letter. May Day went on. And this year, May Day will come on. Let's not talk about somebody saying, I'll not be part of May Day. They can also organize their own May Day, but I don't want it to look like I am wading between CLOGSAG or TUC. TUC is an umbrella body. HSWU is an affiliate of TUC. Okay. And for that matter, organized labor, May Day celebration is for organized labor, not for TUC, not for CLOGSAG. If CLOGSAG says, because TUC is there, I don't want to participate, let it be so. It is for organized labor. HSWU is part of organized labor, and it's part of TUC. We will go ahead and celebrate May Day as we have always done it. This year, all of us are marching to the Independence Square, and we are going to celebrate May Day massively. I can tell you that for our membership of over 30,000, HSWU have procured May Day t-shirts for every member. Whether you are going to the ground or not, we are going to do it massively.
There's a single question, though, about what's going to happen if government is unable to meet the demands for pay increase, for salary increase that's being made generally by workers in the country. What's going to happen if government is unable to meet it?
That demand is determined on the negotiation table, not on the media as we are talking about.
I get you.
Let us get there and we'll cross it.
Are you willing to back down on this demand?
What demand are you talking about?
The demand for higher pay that is pegged to inflation.
And I'm telling you, giving inflation is just restoring what you used to have. And so we haven't even tabled anything. So what am I going to back down on?
I understand you. I'm sure we can have a longer conversation after the day is celebrated. Many thanks to you for joining us, the General Secretary of Health Service Workers Union. And I understand you have to join that particular meeting too. I appreciate your time this evening, sir.
Thank you, and God bless you.
So, frankly, ANSAH is the General Secretary of the Health Service Workers Union. I've been joined on this conversation by Professor Stephen Adair. He's an economist. He's a distinguished man who understands some of these things better than I do. Today, we are looking at the state of the Ghanaian worker and what's been happening on the labor front. As we speak, CLOGSAG is on strike. TUC has its own issues with government. And you just heard the Health Service Workers Union give out indications of what it's going to do going forward and demanding more from government about what ought to be done. Now, Prof, you're welcome to our front. If you can hear me, Prof, you're welcome to our front. Yeah, I'll be glad if you could unmute your yes. Yes. Brilliant.
Thank you.
I think I can hear you properly now. Now, Prof, the question on my mind is It's almost like two different words. On one hand, government is very worried about the demands coming from labor. In fact, one is already on strike. Government is unable to pay. Government is hoping to pay, for example, the allowance that has been tagged, the allowance for neutrality. The main reason why KWABENA is on strike. The Health Service Workers Union and the TUC are already indicating that they are also going to make higher demands because the current situation in terms of the economy is not favoring their pockets and their living conditions. How do we bridge the gap? First, are these demands legitimate, mindful of our current economic climate?
Well, it depends upon what you mean by legitimate. That do the workers need more money? The answer is yes. But it's like if you are living with your mother and your father and they don't have money. By the way, my name is spelled ADEI, not ADDAE.
Very well. I'm sure it will be amended.
Okay. And there's hardship. Your parents cannot afford. And you say that, well, if my parents cannot afford what I want, then I am going to leave the house. You may as well leave and go and die. What is not being realized is the situation in which the country is in. At this moment, the government's projected expenditure in order for the economy not to collapse, and we can come to the causes of it, that's not, is such that the government has to reduce expenditure by 20%. And already, debt servicing and public sector wage takes about 95 to 98%. So, yes, I have no doubt at all that given the economic circumstances, the price increases, the petroleum prices, workers are having a hard time. But I can't see how the government can pay any significant pay increase now, other than printing money, which would fuel a cycle of inflation because it will not be backed by any productivity. And especially the next 3 months or to 4 months, things are going to be harder because it's the lean season. Apart from everything else, May, June, July, when you hit July, you are in Kitaunsa, hold your hand before else you will steal. So it's a very big dilemma. And the labor people, the CLOSAG can go on strike and other things, but I doubt whether the government can pay it. And therefore, there must be a willingness to give and take because there's no way. I heard the TUC, my good friend, saying, 19% inflation. 19% inflation in April doesn't mean that inflation over the past 1 month has gone up for 90%. And that was if you compare it with the year past. And we cannot be running an economy and every month when there's a change in inflation, you change salaries. So it's a very, very tricky situation that the government must be very careful because what the solution the workers are looking for, even when they get it, it will be an illusion. It will be like printing money in order to give them more salaries. I remember they consume half of all the government revenue. I want
to raise this point with you, though, about the current controversy on what is called the neutrality allowance, the crux of what is taking the people to the strike in the first place. So is government failure to pay since the beginning of this year? That neutrality allowance, that's the reason why they are on strike. Is it a legitimate allowance?
To be honest with you, as somebody who spent 35 years in national and international public service, the idea of neutrality allowance just makes me sick. So if they are not paid, they are not going to be neutral. That's what they mean. Let them declare their political colors. In fact, never in the world, and I don't know, the government somehow just get themselves into trouble. The idea of a public servant being paid neutrality allowance, to me, is the most stupid thing I've ever heard in my life. What they must say, which the trade union is saying, things are hard, can the government improve our salary? But to say that give me money so that politically I'll be neutral, you must leave the public service with immediate effect. But I don't know what has happened. Maybe I'm of the colonial type, because in my time, anyone who said that one will be fired with immediacy. But I hear that the government has signed an agreement with them. And if they have signed an agreement and they are insisting on their pound of flesh, but I don't believe that any government, I would doubt the sanity of the government to have signed an agreement to pay civil servants a neutrality allowance.
Well, government admits it did. It says it did because...
It's crazy.
Prof, government admits, according to Deputy Employment Minister, government agrees that we signed the agreement with them. We wanted to pay them 20% of their current pay as neutrality allowance, and we are only unable to pay because of the current financial situation we find ourselves. Is that a legitimate, or if you call it, is that a good enough reason for them to go on strike?
Well, of course, if you say me you are going to pay me and you can't pay me, then I can demand my pound of flesh. But this is a Shylock demand of flesh. I don't think that they can take Ghanaians for a ride to say that in the first place, they have to be paid. And for the government to have done that is wrong. And I think that they are taking the ordinary Ghanaian, because the suffering. What about the unemployed person? Are they more in need, are less in need of help than the public servant? I mean, we are in a national crisis, and that life is difficult, I have no doubt at all. But for the government to say they are going to pay, actually, it's a bribery. Say, I'm going to bribe you so that you don't go to the opposition, or vice versa. To me, is the worst I can ever think of as someone who was in the public sector for 35 years and the head of the public service training institution. Please pardon me, I just can't conceptualize it. And these are people who must be locked out, so that locked out means that they are all sacked and they can apply or stay at home. And I'm sure that Ghana will be better off.
Already the strike is biting. Public service, specifically some civil and local service, actually, people are struggling to get these services done. It tells you that they are very relevant human resource to the country, isn't it?
No, they are relevant. No, for the public servants not to be relevant, to say that one is wrong. But this is a national crisis. If I were in government, I would lock them up, sack them. Lockout means you sack them, and then bring in the military to take care of emergencies and see what they will do. I mean, you cannot say that a public servant says, I will not go to work because you haven't paid me, so that I will not support NDC or NPP. Come on. Is that where this nation is getting to? Is that what the politicians are doing to us? And is this what the civil servants are going to leave as a legacy? Come on. Let us be very, very clear that what is being asked for and being done, either side, is unacceptable, that there is a time of hardship. And we must think how we can go over this, which I believe is not going to be permanent. How can we go over this hunch? But if you use that time to introduce irrational policies, you make the future worse than today. And that's what is being happening. That's what's happening. We must first take the bull by the horn and let them stay home, and let you bring in the military for emergency services. And after 3 months, just those who want to come can apply if they want to be neutral or stay home and do their politics. Come on.
That's crippling the civil service, isn't it? We basically will be running it to the ground.
Listen, I know of a country which one day decided to sack 16,000 policemen. And that country, rose from being one of the most corrupt to the relatively clean. Any civil servant who wants to be paid neutrality allowance is not doing this country any good. And they better go and stay home and let us have emergency services by the security agencies until a new civil service is put in place. People should know that we are talking about 700,000 people out of 30 million Ghanaians, chopping 50% of all our revenue. And that, as President Mahama would say, the bone.
The meat is down to the bone.
Yes, and he said that if you don't go and find me, cut your leg for me to eat, I'm going on strike. Because other than that, I will show you. This idea that people can make any demand and get away with it. That there's suffering, yes, but that suffering has come, which we all have to endure. And if other people want things to be harder for everybody else, they must be dealt with. But of course, that's why I'm not a politician.
There's, however, some people who believe that we should also scrutinize the quality of decision making by those who agreed to pay this particular allowance.
But you heard me say that anybody who signed that one is as culpable as those who are demanding it. How can you go and sign? Basically, what the civil servants are saying is this: if you don't bribe me, I will sabotage you as a government. And then they have given in. Basically, that's what it means. Because if you know, I'm not going to be neutral. If you don't bribe me, it's actually a national bribery of the politicians of the civil service. And the civil service, of course, will hold them to ransom. So yes, I agree with you. Those who signed it couldn't have been doing Ghana any good.
At the core of the conversation is the fact that the workers say we are the least paid. We in CLOSAC, we are the least paid on the single spine structure.
Compared to the unemployed person, compared to the unemployed, there are more unemployed people than employed. Whom are they comparing themselves with? Are they comparing themselves with the doctors? They say that the average CLOSAC person should get the same as a doctor. Please, are they compared with?
That's the point you're making. Yeah. Yes, Prof. I was actually making the point that the argument is that this is just another way that all the people within our scope, employers and workers, agree we are the least paid. It's just propping us up enough and admitting that we don't have conditions of service, which is what they should be putting in place for us. That's the counter argument of the labor union.
Listen, so long as, here you are, it's only the government that, because people have the idea that the government can print money, so therefore you should go and print money. The question is this: the CLOSAC people, their relativity with other people, has it worsened over time? That should be the issue. So if it hasn't worsened the relativity, then there's why now, when the government is least capable, and I'm not saying it in terms of they're not holding the government responsible, but at this moment, with what has happened in the first quarter of this year and the stabilization that has to be put in, if anybody says, all the time I've been least paid, but now that's the end, the person themselves doesn't understand the state in which this economy is in.
Going beyond that, there's a question of productivity that others are also raising, that this is not really a matter of only CLOSAC. Other workers are also demanding pay rise. For example, the TUC is saying that anything below inflationary rates is unacceptable to us. I just spoke to the Health Service Workers Union, who's saying that they've been worse off by the recent increase, and they agreed, minimum wages over the period. So this time around, going into tripartite committee, the biggest conversation will be making sure that they get a living wage so that they can survive on these. Can government weather the storm, all the pressures from across labor currently, and the threats that they will be embarking on industrial action? Can this government be able to cough up, to live up to expectation, and deliver to these workers the amounts they are demanding?
Personally, my view is that the government cannot. And if it wants to do it, let me tell you, the workers will not be better off. We will get into what we call spiral inflation. Because at this moment, the government doesn't have the revenues. So if it were to do so, and I don't think the Bank of Ghana and the IMF will allow them anyway, inflation will hit through the roof, the CD will fall into the gutter, and the worker will see that his salary increase is just a paper one. These things, other countries have gone through it. Brazil, for years, was running inflation about 100%. So it's not something which the world has not experienced. At this moment, between now and about the end of the year, all must accept that Ghana is going to go through a very hard time. And unless we all are prepared, including the government, that's why 2 weeks before the government came with a 30% increase in the reduction in their salary, I say that the public sector, government, the politicians must cut their salaries by 25%. I'm glad they went to 30%.
Very well, you said it here.
So these are the realities. And the workers are saying that there's inflation. Yes, it makes life hard for you. But the question is, those leaders of the workers, if they don't understand the situation we are in, I doubt whether they can be representing Ghana, the bigger Ghana. If they are representing only the 700,000 people, and no matter what happens to the country, I'm saying that the remaining 29.3 Ghanaians, even if you cut the half our younger, should rise against them also, because we cannot allow them to ruin the economy.
Prof, there's a question about productivity. Are we getting enough from our workers?
So far, I don't think so, but it's not only the public sector. It's
okay, that's interesting.
program. You know, when I was a young man, I did a productivity study. It was requested by the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. And to my surprise, the Ghanaian workers' productivity was among the lowest in Africa. And it shocked me that the average worker in Togo, productivity was higher than the Ghanaian. But now I see it in practice. If you are building a house and you want to be a high level productivity, and you go to, I live in a developing area, you go there, almost all the workers, the good masons and that things are Togolese. Of course, they say, oh, they speak up, and we ask him for his hometown, he end up with being a Togolese. Our productivity level is low. I just went to a shop. I won't mention the shop. And when I went there, I told my driver who was going there, are these people working? It was about 4:30. Half of the people were sitting down. And if you want to, I wanted to find the price of a mineral. And you have to go there and beg them to come and tell you the price. And I told him, and this person tomorrow will want a salary increase. The productivity but it's a national issue. And I found, I was a leader. I work in the public sector of Ghana for 21 years. Yeah, most of the remaining time I was with the United Nations and the Commonwealth Secretariat. And I found, especially in Gimpa, that we could increase our productivity, and we did about 10 times over 9 years. And I don't think that we hit the roof. So the productivity in Ghana, if we don't address it, and we think that we need a paper increase in salary, it will be an illusion.
Prof, I need to let this go, but thank you so much for joining us on today's edition of UPfront. I appreciate your time. There's a question, though, about recent developments on the front. I was seeking to explore your membership of the Judicial Committee. That's the Judicial Committee of the Republic. On this particular one, two papers have sought to create the impression that the judiciary is still somewhat not the very best. They say there's corruption in that particular system. Others are saying it's a sign that we are not delivering the level of justice we should be delivering in the country. Do you agree?
I don't think that anybody can deny that the corruption in the public sector, including the judiciary. But people sometimes make a mistake between the judicial service and the judiciary. There are two things. When you go to court, those typists, the registrars and other things, where a lot of these branches are paid, they are the judicial service. They are civil servants. And yes, I won't absorb the judges, but let me tell you, my view is that as we go up the ladder in the judiciary, that is the judges, we have one of the best in Africa. So yes, there is, and what people are quoting is this idea publication of the US.
Yes, the State Department report.
The State Department report. You don't need that one to know that the average level in Transparency International at our best puts us at 43. So it's across the board. I don't think that the judiciary is worse than the customs or is worse than the police. So, but it's something we must continually work at it because they should be the final arbiter for everyone. And therefore, we cannot condone any corruption in it. But it is not, this report is a standard report of the US Department. They are not saying that it has gotten worse, but I and you cannot sit here and say that there's no corruption in the judiciary. Will you?
I get your point, and I'm grateful for you joining us today, Prof. I appreciate your time, sir.
You're most welcome.
We sure should get Parliament's view of this conversation. So if you are just joining us, we started the conversation by asking Labour to tell us what's the state of the Ghanaian worker. The Health Service Workers Union represented Labour and said there's a massive demand for the Ghanaian worker who is currently worse off to be improved. We've heard independent talk from Professor Stephen Adair, who believes that some of the demands they are making are not justified and government cannot even pay more when it comes to salary increases and other things. Let me now go to Parliament and speak to the ranking on the Employment and Social Welfare Committee. The Honourable Dr. KWABENA Donkor, welcome to UPfront. If you can unmute, I will be very glad if, yes, I'll be very happy if you can unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, and I'm so grateful for your patience in staying on and be part of this conversation. At the core of this are two opposing views. One, we are worse off and we demand more. That is coming from the workers because of the current situation, fuel price, the CD, and all the combination of factors and the price hikes admitted by virtually everybody in this country. On the other side, though, there's the view that our economy cannot sustain any further demand on it, be it, the case of salary increments or the payment of neutrality allowances on this front. When you look at the Ghanaian worker today, do you feel there's an urgent need to improve their situation, and can government pay?
Well, let me start off by saying I am not representing Parliament on this program, even though I am of Parliament.
Certainly.
Technically, Parliament is on recess, and so I cannot even say I'm representing my caucus because we have not met as a caucus to deliberate on this.
I get you.
As the member on employment and state-owned enterprises, I have a view. And my view is that as a people, we are quite often not serious in our approach to issues. And therefore, we allow things to creep up on us. The so-called neutrality allowance of 20% is a good example of allowing things to creep up on us. Personally, I don't support the neutrality allowance. I don't support the nomenclature, and I don't support the fact that it is an allowance. However, I sincerely believe that CLOSAC has a case. The civil and local government services have a case. They have a case in that we have allowed the spirit and philosophy behind the single spine system to be disregarded. The civil and local government workers are the lowest paid in the broad public service. And that is my concern, that there is a need to align their wages or their salaries to the broader public service. They should not become the poor cousins of the broader public service. I am against the allowance because it is an allowance. Fundamentally, what we need to do is to realign their salary to the broader public service. There is a need for an increase in their salary. I am against the allowance because allowance has its own demerits. It is not pensionable. When they go on retirement, when the civil servant, the local government worker goes on retirement, that is when he or she is most vulnerable. If we peg their remuneration with allowances, such as the neutrality allowance, we create a situation where they suffer in terms of pension rights. And therefore, the issue should be on their basic salary. Why should the GRE, Professor was a board chairman of GRE, why should GRE workers in the same public service earn 2-3 times that of the civil and local government services on the same grade? So that is the fundamental issue. Let's address fundamental issues. Yes, the country is going through a tough time, and this is probably the worst time for salary increases. But we don't create a dislocation and then use tough times as an excuse not to attempt to correct the dislocation.
I get your point. Yes, you are making. Please continue the point you are making. Yeah.
And in any case, the whole idea of neutrality allowance is so absurd to me. If you look at the Civil Service Act, PNDC Law 327, and the Local Government Act 2016, Act 936, political neutrality in terms of partisanship is at the core of both laws. It is the spirit, the core of the two services. So that in between administrations, we can still have a civil service, can still have a government service that has nothing to do.
Well, we appear to have lost Dr. Donkor there. If that line, the Zoom connection can be rectified, we'll be hearing more from him. And yeah, I understand he's back on. Thanks be to God. We sure should be hearing from you, Dr. Donkor. You're making the point about realigning what used to be the proper structure of the single spine salary structure.
Precisely. Fortunately, I helped work on the civil spine in my private capacity when we were in opposition under President Kufuor. I helped work with a consultant on it. And therefore, that is the real issue. The local and government service, the civil service are underpaid compared to their siblings in the broader public service.
But is this the right time to make the demands? Is this the right time?
Look, the demand is legitimate. One, let's concede that they have a legitimate demand. Recognizing that they have a legitimate demand, we can then negotiate, have a discussion with them that, yes, we recognize you have been shortchanged over the period, there is a clear commitment and intention to address the issues. But just give us a little bit of time. And I was also saying that neutrality, political neutrality, is at the core of the civil and local government service. So you cannot pay an allowance for that. Anyone wanting to join the civil service or the local government service must recognize that these two bodies are politically neutral. So it beggars the question to pay them allowance for being what they are. It has the ripple effect of triggering further industrial unrest. Electoral Commission workers are also supposed to be politically neutral.
Yeah.
National Commission on Civil Education are supposed to be neutral. Judicial Service, they are supposed to be neutral. Once you open the Pandora box, once you open the floodgate, other institutions are also coming on, okay, we are also politically neutral. And so it is a quick fix. We are putting plaster over the crack rather than addressing the crack. The real issue is the low wages of civil and local government service compared to their cousins in the same broad public service space.
If I can indulge you further on this issue to do with allowances, it's not only cluster neutrality allowances that's being contended today. We understand that state-owned enterprises, the big bosses in there, they enjoy a plethora of allowances that's already making people go crazy, like inconvenience allowance, which KWABENA has disputed for itself anyway, and other institutions have so many of them that people believe that these allowances are just not justifiable, mindful of the kind of productivity and the kind of losses the institutions have been making. What do we do with these allowances?
Raymond, let's be clear. If you go to the Ministry of Finance, for example, which is still part of the civil service, the gap between principal economic officer and chief economic officer is huge. The huge gap is made up of allowances. If you go to GRA, the gap between a principal collector and a chief collector is also huge, to the extent that once you become chief collector, the joke is that you've gotten into the money zone because you move into a different category. You move into a managerial category, which comes with some allowances which the rank and file do not enjoy. And therefore, when we are talking about these allowances, let's be fair. Are we saying that everybody in Cocoa Board enjoys inconvenience allowance?
No, they're saying that it doesn't make sense for the leadership of companies that are already making massive losses to be compounding the losses of the company, which is state-owned, with these allowances.
That is a different argument. Are you saying that the allowances enjoyed by chief economic officers and analogous grades in the civil service are justified because the civil service is not loss-making? If those allowances for top civil service go to GRA from chief collector upwards, their allowances are totally different from the rank and file. So if we have a challenge with the allowances, it should be across board.
Okay.
Let's take a second look at all the allowances. And then the argument of profitability or otherwise is also a different argument. There are entities in the public sector which were not set up to make profits. The expectation is that they will break even or make a surplus. So again, if we talk of the state-owned sector, let's be clear, we are talking of the commercial state-owned enterprises.
That's
as
true.
Public entities or the service rendering entities. If we're talking about the commercial sector, then we should begin to link pay to profitability. There should be a direct link.
I get
like
your point.
in the corporate world. So that when you make profits, if it's set up as a commercial entity and you make profits, then you should be entitled to some incentive for making profit. If you do not make profit, you are not entitled. Instead of banding around the argument to cover everybody, let's be scientific.
Okay, I get your point. My very last question to you is this something that you and your colleagues in Parliament may be interested in? This general call for review of allowances?
Well, the executive arm of government has the primary responsibility. If they bring a proposal, I believe the committee of which I'm the ranking member will be very interested in looking at it for reasons of equity, for reasons of the national interest, etc. But the working class, the working people have a right to a fair wage. That is fundamental.
Very well.
Then the broader issue of productivity. Do we really have a productivity matrix for the civil and local government service? Have we established one? Have we agreed on productivity measurement? How do we measure productivity in the civil and local government service? Or apart from the commercial public sector, where profit is a measurement of productivity, have we agreed on a matrix for productivity in the civil and local government service? If we have not, that is where we should begin. Let's agree with a measurement, a national measurement for productivity in the public service, in the non-profit space of the public service. And then we work towards improving productivity. Again, let's also tackle the question of the establishment. In the civil service, there is what we call the establishment. How many people are needed to carry out a particular job? And do we review the numbers periodically to take account of modern working practices? Or we just employ and add to numbers and then we find out we cannot pay? A number of entities in the last 5-6 years have increased their staff numbers astronomically.
Doc,
has they? Yeah.
Yes, I guess these are very thought-provoking proposals you are giving. I want to believe that we can have a longer period to discuss them into greater detail in the future. But for now, I appreciate your time for joining us on this particular show. And folks, that's where we end today's edition of Upfront. Many thanks to you for joining our edition dedicated to workers and the current struggles within that particular space.